Virgulino Ferreira da Silva may not be a familiar name to many people, but his famous nickname, Lampião. This nickname came about because of Virgulino's incredible skill with his rifle. Biographer Cincinato Ferreira Neto explained that, after shooting so much, Lampião's rifle seemed like a lantern, lighting up the dark nights of the Caatinga. The story of Lampião is full of legends, and he is often seen as a kind of northeastern Robin Hood. But was he truly a revolutionary of his time, or did his fame hide a darker and more violent side? As poet Jader Carvalho wrote, "In my land, the bandit swears he will kill, and he does." Before continuing with the video, remember to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive notifications of new videos. That way, you won't miss any new content. On November 10, 1937, President Getulio Vargas staged a coup and became the dictator of Brazil. This new government, called the Estado Novo, New State, forced the authorities of the Northeast to combat the Cangaço, armed groups that terrorized the northeastern hinterland. The Cangaceiros were known for wandering from town to town, committing terrible crimes such as robberies, murders, and even violent attacks on villages. They knew the desert like no one else, wore leather clothing to protect themselves from the thorny vegetation, and carried rifles and long knives known as peixeiras. Since the 1800s, Cangaceiros began to appear, with the first group led by Lucas Evangelista. Over time, many other bands emerged, and these Cangaceiros eventually allied with the powerful coronels of the time, who used violence to maintain power. During this period, elections were not secret, and coronels forced people to vote for their chosen candidates. Violence and the use of weapons were so common that they became normal, and these groups protected the coronels' lands from invaders and even other Cangaceiros. It was in this scenario that Virgulino was born in 1898, the son of José Ferreira dos Santos and Maria Susana da Purificação. His family was poor and lived in Vila Bela, facing many challenges. When Virgulino was only 21 years old, his family was forced to abandon their land, pressured by a powerful politician, José Alves de Barro, who wanted their property. Even after moving, the persecution continued. To protect themselves, Virgulino and his brothers began to join small groups of Cangaceiros in the region. In 1919, after his father's death, he joined the group of the Cangaceiro Senhor Pereira, where he earned the nickname Lampião because of his skill with the rifle, which, when fired at night, seemed to shine like a lamp. Soon, Lampião took over the leadership of the gang and sought revenge on those who had turned his father over to the police. But his thirst for vengeance extended to others, and he and his gang began to attack small villages, where many rural workers were killed. Those who didn't want to be attacked had to pay a large sum of money to the group. Despite his brutality, some saw Lampião as a hero, as he fought against the coronels, who were also oppressive figures to the people. This popular support was essential for him, as there were people, known as coiteiros, who helped him by offering shelter, food, and medicine. In addition, Lampião and his group had a unique style. They wore scarves, hats with star designs, and mystical objects hanging around their necks, creating an image of a king of Cangaço. In 1922, Lampião's group attacked the Baronesa de Agua Branca in Alagoas, causing panic among the coronels and rich families. At that time, the Coluna Prestes also emerged, advocating for secret voting and bringing new ideas to the Northeast. However, this group also caused problems, and there were reports of violence wherever they went. Concerned, a congressman asked for Father Cicero's help to contact Lampião. The plan was for Lampião and his group to fight against the Coluna Prestes, in exchange for the pardon of their crimes and a title of captain. Lampião and his men met with Father Cicero, who, according to some stories, even tried to convince Lampião to abandon crime. Despite receiving weapons and the promised title, Lampião soon realized that the document was legally invalid, but he didn't care and continued his activities. Over time, Lampião and his gang's brutality continued to grow. In 1927, he decided to attack the city of Mossoró in Rio Grande do Norte. On the night of June 12th, while the city celebrated the feast of Santo Antonio, frightening news spread. According to locals, the feared bandit Lampião and his group were approaching the city. The news came from people who had fled from one of the nearby villages, San Sebastián, where the cangaceros had launched another invasion. The mayor of the city, Colonel Rodolfo Fernandez, was ready to face Lampião and his gang. When the news of the group's approach spread, many residents of Mossoró fled, and the train stations were crowded with desperate people. Lampião soon noticed all the movement, which made him think it would be an easy victory. The city had 20,000 inhabitants, and the more people remained, the easier the victory would be. Lampião sent a letter to the mayor asking for money to avoid attacking the city. This practice of demanding money was common among cangaceros, but the amount he requested this time was much higher than usual. The mayor did not bother to respond to the letter. On June 13, 1927, when the city was already surrounded, Lampião sent a second letter. The mayor responded with a simple no, adding that if the bandit wanted the money, he would have to come and get it himself. Around 4 p.m., the first shots were heard. The battle began between the 80 cangaceros and 200 locals and police officers. Lampião was surprised to see that the residents were also defending the city, and they had built a large trench in front of the church of São Vicente in downtown Mossoró. The fight lasted about 2 hours, and the cangacero Colchette was killed, his skull crushed by gunfire. Gradually, the gang realized that it would be impossible to win the battle. During their escape, the cangacero Jararaca was left behind, but he was not captured or killed. He was buried alive. After the defeat, Lampião was frustrated, and this event led several troops to begin hunting him. During one of these battles, he lost the sight in one of his eyes and started wearing glasses. His fame continued to grow, and he began to be seen as a role model. Despite being a religious man who prayed at noon and fasted on Fridays, his life was marked by violence. He wore distinctive leather clothing and had a strong connection with his followers. After the defeat in Mossoró, Lampião hid along the banks of the São Francisco River, an area spanning Bahia, Pernambuco, Alagoas, and Sergipe. There, he split his gang into smaller groups to make tracking more difficult. This led to even more violence in the northeast, with newspapers reporting increasingly violent crimes, such as murders and arson. Lampião relied on the help of coiteiros, people who supported him, including even some coronels, who kept him informed about the movements of the authorities. A major supporter came in the form of a woman, Maria Gomes de Oliveira, who had suffered from an abusive relationship and offered to help the gang. She eventually fell in love with Lampião, left her husband, and fled with him in 1929. Maria became an important figure in the Cangacho, known as Maria do Capitão. Unlike other women in the group, she was never mistreated by the cangaceros, and her presence was distinctive. Maria wore clothes as imposing as Lampião's and carried a Colt revolver, along with several rings from her victims. She also had a silver and ivory dagger similar to Lampião's. In 1931, Maria became pregnant and had a daughter, Expedita Gomes de Oliveira Ferreira, who was entrusted to cowhands for care. By this time, Lampião had become famous even outside Brazil, being referred to as the greatest outlaw in Latin America. His image was captured by Benjamin Abraão Boto, who, in collaboration with Lampião, took a series of historic photos of the Cangacho. Despite his fame, Lampião was increasingly hunted by volantes, groups formed specifically to capture him. The pressure was mounting, and he had to hide constantly, even using tricks like wearing his shoes backward to confuse the trackers. In 1938, Maria tried to convince Lampião to abandon the Cangaço and go into hiding in a peaceful place, but he refused to give up his life of crime. On July 27, 1938, a meeting was set at the Gruta dos Angicos in Sergipe. Lampião, already exhausted and with impaired vision, heard the first gunshot. He was shot in the stomach, and Maria was shot in the back as she fell onto him. Thus, the life of the king of Cangacho ended violently, marked by many tragedies. In a short time, about 11 Cangacheros were killed, and the others fled. Maria, a brave woman who was part of Lampião's group, was still alive when Lieutenant Bezerra killed her. From that day, she became known as Maria Bonita. As news of what happened began to spread, many people wondered how the famous king of Cangacho, Lampião, had been caught off guard. The answer lies in an interesting story that happened before the ambush. It all started with Pedro de Candido, a trusted friend of Lampião, who went to a man named Joca Bernardo's house to buy a large amount of cheese. This made Joca suspicious that the cheese was for Lampião's cangaceros. Hoka had also heard rumors that Lampião's group had passed through that region. He went to the police station in Piranhas and reported his suspicions. A letter was then sent to Lieutenant João Bezerra, who was in the area, asking him to act quickly. Lieutenant Bezerra, with a few soldiers, prepared to attack Lampião's group. They knew he was in the Caatinga and began the hunt. Hoka, according to some legends, had betrayed Pedro de Candido to the soldiers out of envy, as he had also been a coitero for another famous cangachero, Corisco, a friend of Lampião. On July 27, 1938, Lieutenant Bezerra and his men, totaling 50 people, set out for the Caatinga. They traveled by boat to a village, where they apprehended Pedro de Candido. After being interrogated, Pedro revealed the exact location where Lampião was hiding. The troop then walked to the Grota do Angico, where the ambush took place around 4:30 a.m. When they approached, Lampião and his men were caught by surprise, and a fierce gunfight ensued. Lampião was shot but did not die immediately. A soldier then shot him in the head to end his suffering. The other cangacheros were killed, and their bodies were decapitated. The soldiers then took the cangaceros' valuable items as trophies. Lampião's death was a major event, and news of it quickly spread throughout the Northeast. The decapitated heads of the cangacheros were displayed in several cities, including Maceió, where people gathered to view the bodies up close. They were so surprised that at one point, an officer even opened Lampião's right eye to show everyone a disease he had. Lampião and Maria Bonita's heads were sent to an institute, where they were kept until 1969, when they were buried by order of the court. The head of Corisco, another important cangachero, was also buried there. After Lampião's death, some of the most famous cangacheros, like Moreno and Durvalina, tried to escape the pursuit and disappeared. In 2016, they spoke about how Lampião's death affected them and how all the cangacheros feared being killed like he was. Others, like Corisco's wife Dada, lived the rest of their lives trying to keep the memory of the past alive. The story of Lampião is full of mystery. For some, he was a hero fighting against the powerful, but for others, he was just a bandit committing cruelties. Perhaps the truth is that Lampião was a man who did what he thought was right, even if his actions involved a lot of violence. This is the story of one of the greatest names in Cangaço, who is still remembered in the Brazilian Northeast. If you enjoyed the story and want to support the channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. You can also become a member to further encourage the content. See you next time.